report by the SBM Intelligence on the tax reforms in Nigeria says that the Tinubu administration has embarked on a necessary but perilous journey. They further note that the technical architecture for a modern tax system is now in place in Nigeria, but its ultimate success or failure will be determined on the streets and in the markets, where citizens will decide if the state has earned the right to replace existing extractors. Victor Ejechi, the head of Insights at SBM Intelligence, joins me now to unpack the report. Thank you so much for your time there, and I'm going to get into that, talking about the reforms in Nigeria and the perception that we're seeing on ground. You say that the success will depend on everyday citizens.
Of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. You can actually have a successful reform in any form without the people being carried along. And that's where the problem comes in. In the report, we pointed out that the major problem of this particular tax reform is the fact that there's a lot of trust deficit. And that we can see that even geographically in different regions in Nigeria. Because there's one thing, sometimes you can just stay in your location and think that everything is blue and white. You know, when you go into the streets and hear from the people, you get to understand what they think and their perception about the tax reform.
Yeah, it's quite a lot, especially when you look at the amount of effort and work that has gone down. Big ups to Taiwo Dele. He's done quite a lot in terms of speaking to town halls and, trying to pass the message across in terms of what's changing and what's not changing. But in terms of the communication of it so far, though, how would you rate that in terms of the understanding by everyday Nigerians and even experts? Yeah,
to be fair, I think Taiwo has done a great job. I've attended a lot of his meeting, and I think also that's not enough. So one of the things that we found out in this report is that communication should not be in a one-way street. They have to be strategic across the country. So, for example, the way you communicate to people in the southwest should be different from the way you communicate to people in the south and also in the northeast. Because from the report, we realize that the more people get to know about the reports, the more they're fighting about it. The more it increased kind of distrust in the government.
Because I was going to get into that handling that perception, the issue of first perception of the government, and attitude towards tax on one hand, and also the trust deficit and how they can bridge that
together. So for you to bridge the trust deficit, the people need to know that their tax will work for them. The money they're being paid will work for them. And that is where we are calling on the government to actually cut excesses. Now, everyday people need to know that, because if I see my government, I'm seeing my governor or the local government chairman spending money using a large convoy and all that, it's difficult for me to believe that they're actually fighting for me when I've not even eaten for the day. So that trust deficit has to start from the government cutting their excesses and actually carrying the people along as well.
Before we get into the findings, let's first understand the motivation behind this report for SBM Intelligence.
So interestingly, as I said, you might be in Lagos and think that Lagos is Nigeria, and it's not. There's many a time whereby you think that Lagos and Abuja, you want to talk about Nigeria, you talk about Lagos and Abuja. I think we were in the office one day, and a colleague of mine that traveled to the south side and came back and said, people don't know about the tax law in this part of the state. That was one of the motivations. So let's go to the street and let's get to find out what the people think. And that was the motivation. And our findings were actually even surprising to us, because we live in the south west, and we know how much work the committee has done as regards to explaining this particular tax reform. Only for us to find out that some people still don't even hear much about it, and they don't even still trust the government on it.
Yeah, so let's get into the methodology now. Now we see what motivated the report. Now let's get into how you went about it.
So what we did is that we have the Jollof Index, which I'm sure you are aware of, right? We have people on the field that give us data on a daily basis. So what we did is that we went back with this set of guys and so go to the streets in different states and get us. We have a questionnaire, of course, that we shared to the people. And then their feedback was what was collated in different zones, of course. We tried to cover the 6 geopolitical zones, and their feedback was what led to the analysis that you saw there.
Interesting, because when you look at all of this, then quite a lot in terms of what this is looking to achieve, but speak to some of the core findings then.
Yeah, one of the core findings, as I said, is that the area where we find out that people are more aware about this tax law, they are actually pumped to protest. And that's even the surprising thing. For example, Lagos, if you check, on the average, we are seeing over 70% people having distrust, having distrust in the government. Now, if you see, for example, Lagos and Bauchi, for example, they have when it comes to awareness about the tax reform, they have a large number, but when it also comes to protest, they are willing to go to the street to protest. It now gives us the point that, okay, the more people get to know, the more they want to actually counter this particular reform. But then we ask ourselves, why is this? You know, the why is very important, because if you also see the discrepancies around the tax law, when the National Assembly seems to be fighting around the fact that some things were actually infused into the tax law and all that also pointed out to the fact that people don't trust whatever is in the tax law itself. You know, so that explained that in one way.
Yeah, that didn't help, especially even when you have professionals as well, you know, like the KPMG reports coming to point
exactly.
that
Even though KPMG have come up to say that what their aim is different from what was communicated, but I think that also pointed out to a lot of people now feel like if KPMG can say this and the law of the whole media around, there's probably something fishy there.
So how then did you go about capturing the informal economy in your report?
Yeah, so the informal economy, of course, the Jollof Index deal with that in the large form, because we did with market people and the informal economy. And that's one of the recommendations that we actually put out, that if you really, because this informal guys feels like, you're coming to tax us more compared to what has been happening in the informal sector. If you hear Taiwo say a lot of time that, the informal guys, they pay a lot of money in terms of tax, but it's just that it is not actually put in an official way. So now, with this tax law, they are thinking that the government is going to come away to tax them more in addition to what they are being taxed. And that actually creates a lot of distrust for the government as well.
More or less looking at it that they are already paying to many non-state actors.
Exactly, so double taxation.
Yeah, so yes, I was going to get into that. Do you think that double taxation is going to be the biggest fault line when you, in terms of the perception from citizens?
Yeah, exactly. Even those that work every day, the corporate guys, still believe that there's a form of double taxation playing out. And that's why we feel like the government needs to still do a lot of work in other parts of the country. And they have to be a form of transparency in dealing with the issue when it comes to money as well. Yeah,
because we're also seeing that resistance also varies across board.
Yeah.
You know, so what does your data show in terms of how the North perceives it, and the level of resistance we're seeing across the country?
Yeah, so if you check the level of resistance across the country, you will realize that, as I said, the more you know, the more you want to fight around this. The people that don't even know more about this particular reform, for example, they have little or no opinion, in quotes. Not as if they are not completely accepting it. So the only reason why you will see a form of a level of percentage there is because, you know, if you check the past years, the distrust about government, it's not just tax reform. It has always been there. People don't just trust the government. And then the whole issue around it. So that's when, for example, when the Senate came up with the issue, and then when we had the issue of the French company coming in place as also a consultant or so, or for such, you know, those two things, you know, those two events create a form of it added to the perception that people have. So these people, there's more. So for some persons, have not even read the report at all. They have not even read the law. They just believe that if these two people can actually point out to this thing, that there's a problem in the report in itself. Interesting.
Then when you then look at all the variations in the society, civil servants on one hand, the private sector professionals, what's the perception like from?
So for the people, just also some states are more civil servant prone. For example, if you talk about the FCT, if you talk about some place in Benin, or like Lagos, that is quite different, right? Their perception is that, I don't trust the government, right? Because one of the questions that we asked in the questionnaire, do you trust the government to utilize your money, the revenue being getting from the tax? You know, most of them said that, no, they don't trust the government. So do you have... will you be able to go to protest if it needs arises? You know, some of them said yes, they would. You know, Southwest was willing to, like Lagos, obviously willing to go on protest, and that's understandable because of the nature of Lagos. You know, Bauchi, for example, also is willing to go on protest also, and these are people that even have more information about the tax law.
Yeah, because I'm looking at your report and I'm saying that over 75% say that they will comply if basic services improve.
Yes, yes.
But in terms of a conversion, then what does government then need to do to deliver to ensure that you know, these people, rather than resist, they buy into the government's plans?
You know, when they say perception can become reality. You know, when people perceive that you're stealing, for example, you just change everything. So even if they don't have any reason to doubt it, they just believe that you're somehow still. The same perception people have about government, that if no matter how good you are, if you get into government, you must steal. That is a perception issue. For government to do, we need to see the dividends of democracy. We need to see that the money that we've gotten from this is being used for this, and there's a lot of improvement in infrastructure. And then let's talk about the everyday food. Inflation has to be not the figure being dropped. Inflation has to be felt on a day-to-day basis. People need to practically see, yes, more reflective. People need to see that this is the price of tomatoes before and it has dropped drastically. And that is when they will start to say, okay, fine, the government is probably doing something that is affecting me and it is being, I'm benefiting from it in one way or the other.
Interesting times, but definitely one will definitely be looking at. But thank you so much for your time today. I've been speaking with Victor Ejechi, the head of Insight at SBM Intelligence.